Organizations collect huge volumes of data, but if they are not using the data and drawing meaningful insights from the data, there's no value or benefit to be gained. Think about what's the next most valuable thing you as an organization could do, starting where you are now and being dedicated and committed to it. Again, these are Agile values, right? We'll see you make some incremental improvements.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Green.io. I'm Gaël, and in this podcast, we empower responsible technologists to build a greener digital world, one bite at a time. Twice a month, on a Tuesday, our guests from across the globe share insights, tools, and alternative approaches, enabling people within the tech sector and beyond to boost digital sustainability. If the choices made during the design phase of a digital product influence its environmental footprint up to 80%, as the green IT expert Frédéric Bordage likes to say, how could we turn every product person into a green product person? And what are the main hurdles preventing product practitioners from embedding sustainable practices in their day-to-day operations? How could sustainability be viewed as a success factor, not a cost? Our two guests today conducted a small qualitative study with product managers and product owners a few months ago. And they got interesting insights which resonated with a huge experience in sustainability, agility, and green software. One is a pirate and the other a smuggler. Joe Masraff, aka Pirate Joe, is a connector of patterns and people who's never shy of daring. She's the co-organizer of the Agilist for Planet and Agilist for Sustainability meetups and an international speaker and thought leader in Agile and sustainability. Sathpal Singh maneuver his boat among many fields at the intersection of software, digital product development, Agile practices, and community building. He is also chair of BCS Agile Methods Group, the organizer of Future of Work Scotland meetup, and an international keynote speaker and professional Kanban trainer. And both are co-founder of Green.io. I wanted to talk a bit more about product management and design from a sustainability perspective for several months. And Joe and Sath are the perfect guest for this. So welcome, Joe and Sath. Thanks a lot for joining Green.io today.
Thanks for having us, Gaël.
Absolutely. Great to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy that you will get some little sunshine from Réunion Island in a gloom and dark and cold day in Scotland.
It's the way we like it. We've got good at it.
But anyway, so thanks a lot for joining. And I think that one of the main focus of our discussion is about this study that you conducted to get more insights on these hurdles and why this low rate of adoption of green practices or sustainable practices. You will maybe explain the difference. So maybe, Joe, could you tell us more about how it was conducted and what were the main findings?
Yeah, absolutely. So Green.io partnered together with a bunch of other agencies across Europe to conduct this study. So we have ThoughtWorks, we have Improv, Digital Initiatives, and the Garage. We combined together to do this survey, and the main findings are exactly as one of them is the one that exactly like you're saying is actually the adoption rate of practices is super low. What we found out, what was interesting, one of the interesting finds was that we asked people to rate themselves on their understanding and know-how of sustainable practices, and they still, out of 10, we still have an average of 4.4 on the knowledge scale. But actually, what we didn't tell them what digital sustainability was. But throughout the interviews, we started to understand actually, what their know-how and knowledge was, and found, of course, that, as per usual, we tend to rate ourselves a little bit higher maybe than is the actual truth, right, when it comes to knowledge. So that knowledge piece, that underlying, foundational stone of how people can take action was missing. So the understanding of sustainability was low. We talked about, for example, we love an iceberg model in Agile and in IT, right? So the sustainability iceberg for us is seeing that, on the top, it's very much that regulatory piece. And in regulation, in IT specifically, there's very little in sustainability unless you look at the social sustainability side. So accessibility and inclusion are the big ones when it comes to what's being adopted. What's kind of sometimes depressing for me, actually, is that people still need a lot of help to make their digital services accessible. It's still not the done thing to make sure that your service is accessible, right? People are still working towards that. And we found that almost 30% of our interviewees, that's where they're at. They're thinking about social, regulatory sustainability, and that's where their focus is. And they think they're being super sustainable by doing that. Of course, it's super important, but it wasn't necessarily what we wanted to hear from people, right? In the green IT space. So that was one of the findings, was that the adoption and the knowledge of sustainable practices is low. And then what we found, again, what you said, is that people are not using it as a success criterion. We still see sustainability, accessibility, security, all of these things as a cost, right? Just like we did with IT back in the day. So IT was a cost center, it was that thing we had to pay for, whereas actually now, IT is technology is the second biggest rising industry market in the world, and green is the fourth. So it just, to me, it makes completely no sense that actually we're not pushing the two together. Surely we have a market winner right there.
I think there's a little bit more to say on the findings from the survey, because one of the things that fascinates me is, I've been talking about this quite a lot, actually, Joe and I, at various events recently prior to us having this conversation. So it's really interesting to see that it is resonating with people. But the one that fascinates me is the level of influence, because that varies greatly on whether people feel like they actually have the level of influence to make a difference. And I think that's really leading us into the point that Joe was just talking about where are we seeing this stuff? Because I don't think we're seeing it as much as we would like to see, because it's still very much that add-on, right? So it's an afterthought. So Joe was talking there about, everything we've all seen being in the tech industry for, I'm in my third decade. For the longest time, it was seen as a cost. Now what we want to see is that shift from it being seen as a compliance regulatory piece, sustainability, and making that shift from left to right to going from being, focused on regulations because you have to be. So that usually does come from that tick box piece, sadly. Reporting, right? What are the reporting requirements that an organisation faces? They will focus on those. But we are now talking a lot more about shifting to being a little bit more opportunistic. So look at your context. Where might the opportunities be? And I think that's where the Agile piece comes in. So we could probably come back to that. But moving more to strategic piece. And one of the things Joe and I have talked a lot about is some of the organisations like Ecosia and others who have built this into their business models and are thinking much more about this strategically and how it can give them market advantage. And that's really where we're trying to shift this conversation, which is what we were talking about just the other day at the Sustainability for Agile event. The current state of sustainability at Agile is the official name of the event. So all this stuff's really fascinating us. And like we both said, to me, there's just this very natural intersection between sustainability and agility. Even fundamentally, if I think about all the years we've been helping organisations with agile practices, we've talked forever about sustainable pace, right? For the longest time, we've talked about sustainable pace. But what can that really mean? We can go from the pace, sustainable pace, which is really about operating rhythm, to then making more conscious, sensible choices, which can give us longer term benefits. So for me, it's, pace, rhythm, to then, longer term sustainable change. So not being short term in our thinking, moving more to strategic thinking. That's really kind of where I think we're really coming from here. And then that's what we're looking to truly advocate for and embed in the work that we're doing.
Well, there are interesting leads in insights into what you've already shared. Just to make sure to understand both of you well about the main findings, and once again, it was not conducted over hundreds and hundreds of practitioners, but more selected PO and PM across Europe. Correct me if I'm wrong, Joe. It was mostly European-based. Yeah, okay. Is that people that tend to believe they know about sustainability in a quite comprehensive understanding, and when you deep dived, it was mostly about accessibility, which is a absolute essential part of sustainability, obviously, and more ethical choice rather than also the economic part of sustainability, and of course the environmental part of sustainability. So that was one of the first finding. Okay, I see you nodding. So yeah, I guess
It's
this was
around
it.
about 40%. So around about 40% of our interviewees were looking at regulatory, social sustainability, mostly accessibility. We also had some people thinking about how to reduce paper statements and things like that. We're still at that kind of level.
Yeah. Okay. So that's basic stuff. And what is interesting also, and you added on it, is that people tend to see sustainability from a regulatory perspective. As you mentioned, it is almost never mentioned as a differentiator for market position, employer branding, etc. So far, it's so good. And am I parroting you well?
Yes, you got my pirate parrot.
And Sass, you want to add something on it?
So the other thing I was just going to add to what we're talking about here is the participants of this survey were themselves experienced practitioners. So it's worth bearing that in mind. So these are not, folk who are very new to the product owner role or just, starting their journey. These are, professionals with 5+ years of industry experience. And still, what they're acknowledging is that two key things from my perspective is that their level of knowledge and understanding is still on the low side, which I think is really, really an important learning. And also the fact that, the organisational spread across the participants was quite broad, that in their organisational context, their organisations are not yet embracing sustainability as a strategic advantage. And I think that's massive.
What are the main hurdles? Because you mentioned, Joe, that it might be that people don't feel empowered enough at the level of a thing that they believe they can do on sustainability when it's not a box, to tick from a regulatory perspective. But is this the only one, or is there any other hurdles or misconceptions preventing people to be more ambitious and more comprehensive about sustainability?
I'm going to come back to the question because one last point of the findings was it's on the individuals, which I think we're seeing everywhere, right? Sustainability is driven by passionate people who want to be doing something. And that's almost linking back to the last question, right? You don't have those individuals who are willing to step outside that kind of comfort zone of what they know, to start talking about it, start asking the questions, then nothing goes anywhere. Even if you have sustainability as one of, your top 5 values that you're going for this year, which a lot of companies do, unless people think about how they can actually embed that within what their piece of the pie is trying to do, then it's really hard to get anywhere. So that's one of the things. So slightly outside the report, when we've been talking about this and telling people all about the findings of the report, a lot of people are coming up to me and saying, I didn't know. They don't know what that first step can be. They don't know how to bring sustainability into what they're doing. And they're so pleased to find that people are doing things. I'm sure you find this yourself, Gaël, when you go to the Happy Days conferences and people start talking, with your lovely little quiz for people. They're amazed, right? That actually how big an impact it is making IT within the greenhouse gas emissions globally. And also that actually there's so much out there that people can grab onto to start making a change within their own work life. So it's this whole, I didn't know. The other one is, of course, what Sath already spoke about is this level of influence that people have. So actually the level of agency people have within their organization is partly reflective of how big the organization is. So the bigger the enterprise, the less likely a product person is going to be able to have the influence and agency to do anything. And also the person themselves. So we're back to that. It's on the individual. So if the person is very, stubborn and kind of, they're dog like a bone, they're going to hold on to it, not something's going to happen. Then they will make something happen. Individuals are amazing. The more that you can actually gather other people, other like-minded people together to form those working groups or communities or anything like that, the more likely you're also going to be able to make a difference. So there's a few things there, which I don't know. You want to try summarize?
So just to pick up on that point there, we were talking about some of the challenges that we've learnt about and we face. I think our barriers to your question, Gaël, was one of the. I think it's quite fundamental, especially from the agile perspective that Joe and I come from through our kind of professional experiences. Is this whole learning that sustainability is also not yet baked in as part of the success criteria. And I think that's another really important piece of the findings, because we've spent a lot of our time working with teams and organizations to help them to, define their work, right? Understand the problem, visualize the work, make it transparent, break it down. And one of the things I spent a lot of time doing over the last few years was coaching and helping teams to get better at writing acceptance criteria, right? Because it's quite difficult. It's a difficult thing. It's not easy. It's something we talk about, but it's hard to do well. And you have to think very deeply about what defines success here. And one of the things that we learned through the responses from the product practitioners was that sustainability doesn't feature in the conversations around what defines success. And I find that both fascinating and also a great opportunity, and really where we need to get to. And again, it should start from a very high strategic level, right? So think about the corporate strategy, think about what you're trying to achieve strategically, and then if that narrative can shift and include sustainability as a market success, or support an organization to succeed in whatever marketplace they're in, whatever their context is, that can then sort of filter down and cascade into the teams, and they can then also build in success criteria into how a team contributes to an organization's strategic objectives and intent, which is kind of where I typically come from in this thing as part of the work that Joe and I are doing together. So I think that's a really important aspect of all of this.
So I really love this success criteria approach, but really concretely speaking, to go down to the level of the definition of done, how would you phrase one or two sustainability criteria? Let's imagine that we're working in a digital first company or digital pure player, such as, I don't know, a property portal from a line of work, or secondhand marketplace, or, like really a company where 100% of the business is made online, and most of the revenues come from building a digital platform. So it's not like IT as a support function, but it's like IT embedded in the very reason of the company. Could you share one or two examples how you will phrase it in the definition of done to stick with the Agile or even Scrum framework?
So you can take it at any level, depending on where the team is at. It's very important to start where you are. Don't set yourself huge, amazing targets, which you're never going to hit, right? So for a start, a team that's starting out, in your definition of done, you can have something as simple as, we've measured how much carbon there is, vaguely, roughly. Or we know how we're going to reduce the carbon on this feature at a feature level. For more detailed, more advanced teams, it's probably going to look different.
I'd agree with that. I think there's obviously a difference between the definition of done, Gaël, that you're talking about, and that's one thing to say, like, when do we know we're complete before we ship a feature? And then what defines the success? And the way I think we should be looking at it, and to answer your question around the language, think about what Joe's just said around definition of done. Build in as part of a checklist that if you develop or enhance a feature, you also will do some level of, carbon measurement on that, which I think right now, I can't imagine there's huge numbers of organizations doing that when they're going at pace, they're trying to get things out the door, and they're doing what they need to do. I mean, I've worked in environments where organizations, teams weren't even able to find the time to do very fundamental quality assurance, let alone what we're talking about. So that's a shift we need to all encourage, and that's where the voices and advocates come in. But then the success piece would be the other stuff that we talked about in actually more of the talks and sessions that we've been doing recently in various different events, which is around the handprint piece. So that's the positive impact. So I think that falls more into the acceptance criteria and what could really define success. And obviously, as we've learned over all the years we've been doing this stuff, sometimes benefits and successes aren't realised immediately, are they? they realise further down the line, as long as you're tracking them and monitoring them and you've got good feedback loops. So the reason we talk in this way is because this stuff is still not embedded as well as many of us would like. It's an ongoing continuous improvement process. What we're really saying is it is now critical that also we do these things through the sustainability lens. That's effectively what we're saying, right?
And I got your point about handprint and footprint. Actually, we were very happy in Singapore to have 2 times Simon, who is one of the main advocate of the handprint approach. Now, but my question would be, does footprint comes first? I mean, except for companies who were sustainability driven from the very beginning, don't you think, and feel absolutely free to challenge me, that paying attention to the footprint first raise the general level of awareness and at some point help the entire company starting to focus and shift a bit more its attention on, well, are we actually doing the right thing in the very core of our business? Because if I take a lot of regular company, they wouldn't, and that's very unfortunate in the way our economy works, they wouldn't really be able to say in which sense they are valuable for the community, the society, or civilization, planet Earth, whatever, when it goes beyond, A, we create jobs, B, we fulfill the need, or actually it's not usually the need, it's the wishes of our customers. And so what? There are plenty of things that people want and that are not necessarily desirable, neither for them or for the society. So rewinding my question, handprint first, footprint first, how would you manage the interaction? What would you advise, especially, let's imagine you've got a CPO, super enthusiastic, but in a regular company, what would you advise them to start with first?
So I think that's a brilliant question, right? And as Joe was saying earlier, when we've been out talking about these things and doing various presentations, it has been amazing to see people coming up to us and asking quite fundamental questions because they don't know, right? They like what we're saying and they understand the importance of it, but they don't know how to get started. So I think your question, Gaël, is perfect. So the way I would encourage that we think about this is if we think about what we've been saying about handprint versus footprint, in my sort of view of it and the way I would advocate for it is the handprint is the broader positive impact of what you're doing. So often, as you rightly say, a lot of us are doing work, but sometimes it's very difficult to translate the real tangible value of it other than something got delivered. So we're back to that whole conversation around output versus outcome. And I think the handprint conversation that we've been talking about, and Joe's been doing a fantastic job of really reinforcing that point in the other talks and things we've been doing, is I think that is where we really should encourage and help people to start. What are you looking to do? And is it really valuable? And what's the positive outcome of that? Because if you cannot understand that or describe that or translate that, should you even be doing that in the first place? And that's where you do need the deeper agile practices, the agile sort of thinking and behaviors that, we've been coaching for many years. You need to go, is this really valuable things to do? Okay, it translates into these outcomes. So I think that's a handprint piece. Then when you're implementing what you're doing, that will naturally lead you into the footprint side, because then that's more of an operational consideration to make sure you're doing whatever you're trying to do in the right way. So first think about, are we doing the right thing? That's your handprint piece. Is there tangible, valuable benefits here, which could be, obviously beneficial to the customer? Clearly, you understand what they need, of economic value, of social value. You can describe all that in the way you describe the work as well. You need to get it funded, right? So I think that's where the opportunity lies. And then you move into when you're implementing and the teams are building whatever you're agreed to do, whatever that might look like. Then you get into the footprint piece around building it efficiently, building it in an environment-friendly way, measuring it, and you would bake that into, like you were saying earlier, your definitions of done and the various tangible operational success criteria. So I think that's a natural progression, but we need to start helping teams to be able to actually do that. And that requires a level of maturity in the way that they think and adopt agile practices.
So I agree with you. In my head, I have it positioned slightly differently in that the footprint is part of the handprint. So if you think about the handprint being the positive impact you're going to make, if you're going to reduce your footprint, it's part of your handprint. So actually, exactly like you said, the handprint is actually encompassing all of it. So if we're having a conversation with, with your board of directors, your leadership team in the company, then we'd be talking about handprint. If you're down talking to the teams, a feature level team, it's much more tangible to them to talk about the footprint. That's something that they can impact. So again, it depends on the context of the conversation that you're having, and the context of the company, of course. But generally, who are you speaking to? Because they're going to be interested in different parts of it.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And that's why I tend to focus a bit more on the footprint than the handprint, because the handprint requires a strategical focus that not all board of directors are willing to do or are able to do. And if you're got a strong pressure from your shareholders, your investors, in that it's really about quarterly earnings and that's it, period, you need sometimes to invest quite a bit of time and energy to really find how the sustainability angle could be a game changer. Whether if you start with the footprint, usually you've got the support, the sponsorship even of the CFO, because usually managing better the footprint equals reducing somehow the costs, and sometimes even from the CHRO, because it's good for, depending where you're based around the world, but most of the time people are pretty happy to reduce the footprint of whatever they do. So this is why I tend to push for footprint before handprint, because then you raise a general level of awareness, like, oh my God, we're emitting so much carbon, so much energy. And I will come back to this point. What do we do with this? Okay, when we made the basic efforts, when we caught the low-hanging fruits, and things are getting me harder, so there is still all this remaining energy, all this carbon emission that we do, sometimes even water consumption or more materials aspect. What do we do with this? And then start the questioning about the handprint. And then maybe at least from an internal perspective, from your internal stakeholders, you might find a bit more support. Now, that leaves open the question of your external stakeholders, which are most of the time your investors. But this is why I tend to push for footprint first, to raise a general of awareness. But as you said, it depends who you're talking to.
Which absolutely makes sense. I think we're back at that, who are we talking to? And what, where did the sustainability push, where did it come from, that push for sustainability? Is it actually the board of directors saying we need to be sustainable? In which case they want to be hearing about the overall handprint. They want to know how to embed it into their sustainability and make it a strategic advantage. They're one of the CEOs, possibly like from the PwC report at the start of this year, right? Who said they saw 65% saw return on investment in sustainability. They understand that. They can see it as a strategic advantage. But if you're talking to the IT manager or the program leader of a couple of teams, then they want to know what impact they can make. Now, they can probably frame it in that wider piece of the handprint, but the tangible outcomes that they can achieve are generally on the footprint. So it's, very context-based, which is such an agile coach's reply, by the way. Apologies, but it's true.
And Joe, bouncing back at what you've just said, because I'm afraid to forget the question. The example you provided with the definition of done was about carbon emission. And Sath, you rightfully said, whoa, that's, pretty high bar already, because a lot of teams don't even pay attention to basic quality needs and so on. I was surprised that you didn't go for energy consumption, for instance, rather than carbon emission, or maybe even just the number of servers or services that are up, because as proxy metrics, since the very beginning, the example you provided, Joe, was carbon emissions, which is perfectly fine. This is actually a very good environmental indicator. But would you really start with this sort of metrics and this sort of definition of done, or depending on who you're talking to, obviously, and the context? Or would you start, and did you already happen to use proxy metrics and, I don't know, maybe some ideas that I've never heard of?
Yes, and we advise for proxy metrics as a starting point. However, a lot of now we could go down a rabbit hole as to whether the metrics are true or not. That's a whole other conversation. However, a lot of our big, providers, which people are using to develop their code, a lot of our DevOps dashboards have the availability of carbon emissions. The CO2 is there. It's just that we're not using it. So it's not as difficult to start with that point for most people as most people think it is. But if it is, then find your proxy. Is it energy? Is it cost? Is it number of servers? Like you said, great example. Love that. Gonna steal it. So yeah, absolutely. But overall, what we're trying to look at is your carbon emissions. However you look at that is it within your context.
Okay, fair point. That it's interesting that you say actually in most companies the data is available, not mentioning the quality of the data, etc. But we know that starting with something, even if it's not accurate, but measuring its evolution usually works good enough for at least 1 or 2 years. Okay, I didn't get this point. Thanks a lot. And Sath, you wanted to say something.
I think you touched on it nicely there. So again, this theme runs throughout the survey findings and the way we've been presenting them back. There's still a lot of work to be done in this awareness piece. And you touched on it, Gaël, right? Think about what we've all just been talking about. Organizations collect huge volumes of data, right? But if they are not using the data in drawing meaningful insights from the data, there's no value or benefit to be gained. So what we're trying to say is, and again, this comes back to, us advocating for, agile practices to help people move the needle on this stuff. Just start where you are. It doesn't matter. Think about what's the next most valuable thing you as an organization could do. Start to think about, the sustainability piece, build it into the narrative. Think about what you're currently measuring, what your success criteria look like, and start to think about how you might refine them. That's essentially what we're saying. And that's a challenge, but starting where you are now and being dedicated and committed to it, again, these are agile values, right? We'll see you make some incremental improvements. But having the willingness to say, well, maybe we could do a bit more here. And actually, we're not as aware as we could be. How do we even educate ourselves? That's something we talked about in some of our sessions, and including, this wonderful podcast that you host. We've actually encouraged people to tune into this so that they can upskill, they can improve their understanding of what's going on across this landscape, because there are various dimensions. Some people will come from the technology perspective. Some people will come from, dare I say it, how do we, move into more of an AI sustainable sort of landscape? We all understand the implications of the large LLMs and all of this stuff. And then partly where Joe and I are really coming from as well, there's a whole group of professionals here who could have a considerably more influential impact on their organizations, because organizations build products. And can they build these products in a more sustainable manner, have, more positive impact on their communities, socially, environmentally? That's the handprint piece we've just talked about. And also working with their agile coaches, their transformation leads, their program people, whoever. The role doesn't matter. What matters is that people exercise their voice and say, we should care about this stuff. And actually, we have the skill set to do more in this space. That's really a lot of what we talk about when we start to conclude the findings and what we're trying to encourage people to do. And that comes, that's what we talked about, the other day in the Agile Sustainability Conference. Very much that everybody could play their part here, but it's all about us, stepping up, building communities around this stuff, allying with one another and amplifying the impact of the positive work we can do here. That's really what we're saying. But that's the strategic piece in my view. And we just need to start building some more momentum on that.
Do any of you have like a success story to share about a company, whether you can name it or not, who managed to create A, this awareness, B, this momentum, C, this moment where I would say this turning point where sustainability stops to be just a nice to have and becomes a must have because it's more and more embedded in the overall strategy. And here comes the handprint piece. Is there any practical use case that you could share with or without naming the company? Can be under NDA, obviously.
At the moment, most of the successes come from companies who are set up that way, right? The strategy's inbuilt from the start, like Ecosia, who we call our sustainability unicorn from the survey. However, they're becoming more success criteria. It's not quite at the level you're talking about where we've had that full transformation into a sustainable organization, but they're starting to reach those tipping points where enough people are paying attention. And so we have one success story where a group was brought together and they, off their own back, decided to create a sustainability awareness week. So they brought in speakers. They had 10% of the company attend, including the CFO. CFO heard, he went away and he turned off 10% of the cloud infrastructure because he saw it as waste. Little things like that. 10% of the company, and then a group of people got together and created a plan for the company to change into to embed sustainability into their practices. Unfortunately, as happens due to market needs, the company had to halve themselves just about, and so sustainability got lost on the wayside. This is part of not seeing it as a success criteria. So they didn't see it from the top as a success criteria yet. The change had begun underneath. The ducks were paddling along, but they were still, nobody at the head above the water was kind of seeing it as the reason why they should be doing it. But then we've got other success criteria where we're seeing working groups and communities of practice do amazing things within enterprises. But again, it's very localized within, because enterprises are generally spread across multiple locations. So where the passionate people are tends to be where the things happen, even though they have support from the kind of quite high level people. It's not being embedded at that level. So again, when you were seeing the bottom up rises, just like happened with Agile, we're seeing lots of bottom up movements, which are doing really well, but we're not quite seeing that change at the board level yet in order to really make this change be strategic. And this is partly why we are talking about things, how we're talking about them, to change people's narrative to seeing it as that competitive advantage, because that's the change that needs to happen now. We're seeing a lot of movement from the bottom. We're seeing, signposting at the top, but we're not seeing that join in the middle, especially when it comes to enterprise and larger organizations. So we need to change that narrative and bring in the product people, because actually the product people tend to be those kind of in-betweeners, as it were, in between the feature teams into your directors, your senior management. So we bring them on board, we change their narrative, and that again goes up another level. So hopefully we'll then see that strategy change throughout the whole organization. So no, not quite yet. I'm still hopeful, as you can tell, though.
I think that is a good point, though. The product professionals, they're glue, right? So they're perfectly well placed to, help, the senior leadership teams understand the challenges faced within the teams, right? And also being that, we used the term proxy earlier, being that proxy into the wider agenda, right? Understanding the customers, understanding the stakeholders, even getting sustainability onto people's radars is one of the things we're talking about, right? Because a lot of people still aren't able to do that because their priorities lie elsewhere. And we're not for a second saying that those priorities should completely shift, but there's a natural way that we can change the language and improve the language and bake in sustainable considerations, which will bring longer term strategic and organizational benefits. And I think product people are extremely well placed to be advocates for that, drawing upon their natural skill set.
Yeah, they've got the skill, they've got the mindset. They don't necessarily have the time or the budget to do so. And because they're prioritizing things almost every hour,
Yeah.
yeah, it remains a challenge. Okay, I got it. Thanks a lot for sharing all this perspective. And I think we explored very diverse places. And I wanted to ask you about what made you, the two of you, concerned about sustainability. I mean, why is it that today you invest so much time and energy into it? And yeah, basically, what are your glasses to see the world? To parrot a very famous French podcaster who uses this expression all the time. Like, where do you speak from?
I mean, it's becoming almost infamous in my little bubble. My story about nappies. So I had a child, and that tends to be, I think, for many people, a big switching point when it comes to sustainability. I had a child, and I looked up about nappies and the sustainability of nappies, or diapers, they're called in most of the world, right? And it takes 450 years for a disposable diaper or nappy to compost itself, to biodegrade. Yeah. So that started me off on the journey. And I was very much into personal sustainability for many years. So trying to buy the right products, trying to use my money in ethical ways as much as possible. And then I was like, but we must be able to do more. Like, it was very frustrating to me to see, when the Amazon rainforest burned, I was like in floods of tears. I had climate anxiety going through the roof. And what helped me was actually using this agile mindset, which I was using in my work life, and applying it to what I was seeing in sustainability. So, because I could apply that to my mindset for sustainability, I then just started taking it further, because I think it's so anybody who's into continuous improvement is always going to see how can they apply the learnings onto the next thing that they're concerned about or thinking about. So it made sense, as Sathpal's touched upon. There's a synchronicity between agile and sustainability. We know, as agilists, how to do change. So why not use our skills in order to help the world?
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Joe. 400 years, it takes a long time. I didn't know that. It's impressive. And Sath, what about you?
Yes, it's very, very similar, really, which is why Joe and I are collaborating on this stuff through Green PO. So for quite some years now, and over your life, certain things matter to you more than others, right? That's just a natural thing, and we continually iterate on ourselves. I often say, so I'm one of these people that spent a lot of his adult life and professional life looking to continuously just be better at whatever it was I was doing at the time, or as good at it as I could possibly be, right? So that is fundamentally, embracing agile behavior. So that's kind of where it comes from me. You have to start with yourself, right? And we've said that today, we've said it throughout. So I've been that way for a lot longer than I even realized and appreciated. That's how I seem to work. I kind of came to that realization probably even in my early 40s, which is kind of astounding, because I believe that self-mastery takes a long time. But also, coupled with that is this whole purpose piece. 2, maybe 3 years ago, I wrote a talk called The Power of Purpose. It came from a very different perspective, and it was kind of inspired, sadly, by, family bereavement and the wide impact of the global pandemic. But as Joe's just said, I'm always looking, whatever I'm looking to do, I'm always looking for the purpose in it. And I think back to being a kid and watching the news and the telly, and now I can't even, because of the news is so depressing now, right? And seeing, the impact of the changing in climate and weather patterns and the global impact of this stuff. Yeah, it triggers me. I find it terrifying, to be honest with you. And much like what Joe said, I'm like, well, how have we found ourselves in this position? And we absolutely have to act, right? And if I think about, again, some of the things we value, and I'm going to quote the Agile Sustainability Manifesto now, coming off of Friday, the values that group have created absolutely resonate with me. So, thinking more about, abundance over scarcity, okay, and value over consumption. And I think that's, to be something that as Agile practitioners, we can absolutely naturally get on board with. So I think there's a whole mix of things here that are really motivating and driving us both. But we also know that we have, the skill sets to help people, and we're applying it in this way in pursuit of this purpose and this journey, and that's kind of where I'm coming from here.
In this journey, being with its up and down, maybe
peaks and troughs.
Maybe I'd love to close the podcast with my usual question. I was like, could you share at least one good news in sustainability, maybe digital sustainability, but sustainability, something that keeps you motivated?
I'm afraid it's not digital sustainability, and it's a bit of a cop-out answer, so apologies. But my hope at the moment is it's not one big thing. It's actually lots of little things. So even, the exponential increase in participants of Green IO conferences, that's amazing. We're seeing, the British government and their digital sustainability outreach is going amazing. They're partnering with lots of companies. That's brilliant. I've got a lady who runs a company called Human Material Loop, where they're using human hair waste to create fabric. Yeah, she's just won a competition. That's amazing. Carbonade, a company in the Nordics, they have just got their first partnership with a factory that creates cement, and it's positive impact cement that they're creating, cement blocks. So it's coming. You can feel it underneath it all, and that's what keeps me going. Is that actually that those ducks under the water? It must be a duck day. The ducks under the water, they're paddling. They're really swimming. And soon we're going to see that the impact is coming. You can feel that wave, because there's no other way to go. We can only be sustainable in the future, at least sustainable, if not regenerative. So it's coming.
So I would say it's you catching weak signals, I would say, despite huge broadcasted signals of negative news.
Yeah.
You keep on being able to catch all those little signals, those weak signals, but announcing a big wave. Okay, got it. That's a very interesting answer. It's a unusual answer because people are a bit depressed at the moment. But yes, if you start adding all these little pieces of information that we gather, it's a much more nuanced tableau, I would say, that we can draw. Yeah, absolutely. And what about you, Sathpal?
Yeah, I'm going to go in a slightly different direction to Joe there. I was just enjoying hearing her playback. So I have a lot of hope here because, and Joe touched on it at the end there, that I think we are starting to build really positive momentum, right? And in the time that Joe and I have been sort of collaborating very closely on all this stuff and talking daily, we were having a daily, stand-up type kind of conversation, and we're covering so many different areas. I find it very energizing. And one of the things that, is probably worth just closing with as well is, as we've gone out there to start to, push this narrative and share this stuff, it's amazing the positive responses that we're seeing. Also, probably hot off the presses, and I'm not sure Joe won't mind me sharing this, is through all the conversations, and we're both community builders, right? We've been doing this stuff for years. A lot of my passion and energy is relationships, building meaningful relationships, helping communities to thrive, building communities. I've done a number of different things here across a number of years now, including in my last organization where I was working across, global organizations at scale, with thousands and thousands of colleagues. Joe and I have agreed to come on board and lead Green Software Foundation Scotland meetup. To really, I guess we often both say to keep walking our talk, right? And all we really, I think, as a close, I would say from my perspective, is we encourage others to come in and join us and get involved, right? And it doesn't matter what you think you believe you know or what you feel you can contribute. You can probably contribute more than you believe you can, but we're making a really active, effort here, and the two of us are naturally very energized people anyway, right? We're full on, we're on the go all the time. I've got a number of different pursuits, but this really matters, and it matters to me. And I would, otherwise I would not be putting in the time and effort and energy that I have been doing, working closely and collaborating with my esteemed colleague. But yeah, I mean, that's it. Momentum is building.
I think that's a good closing sentence. Momentum is building. So thanks, both of you, for this community builder perspective. That was really interesting, and also, sharing all these different levels of influence that we can have in sustainability. And the study was a good starting point for this discussion. So thanks a lot for sharing it. And of course, we will put it in the show notes. I guess I will see some of you quite soon in Paris, and the others, in London next year.
Absolutely. Thanks very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for listening to this Green.io episode. Because accessible and transparent information is in the DNA of Green.io, all the references mentioned in this episode are in the show notes. You can find these notes on your favorite podcast platform and, of course, on our website greenio.tech alongside the full transcript. If you enjoyed this interview, please take 30 seconds to give us 5 stars on Apple Podcast or Spotify, or a like on YouTube. Sharing this episode on social media or directly with relatives working in or with a big tech company is also a smart move to provide them with perspective on the scale of their environmental impact. And it will greatly help us get more responsible technologists on board. Thank you for this. By the way, Green.io is a podcast and much more. So visit greenio.tech to subscribe to our free monthly newsletter and check the conferences we organize across the globe. The next one is in Paris on December 9 to 11, and the lineup is stellar. As a Green.io listener, you can get a free ticket to any Green.io conferences using the voucher Green.io VIP. Just make sure to have one before the 30 free tickets per conference are all gone. I'm looking forward to meeting you there to help you, fellow responsible technologists, build a greener digital world.
One bite at a time.